So today I'm going to be showing you how to replace a wheel bearing on a Honda Accord. First of all, you want to lift it up and go ahead and take the wheel off by removing these 5 lug nuts. Next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take off the caliper bracket by removing these 2 bolts that hold it to the knuckle. I believe they're 17 millimeter. And then this, you can take off that bracket, but it's easier to take off this one that actually holds the brake line to that bracket, and that is a 12 millimeter. It's pretty easy to take off. Now, if you have trouble with these 2 larger bolts that hold the bracket on, I suggest using some PP Blaster on these 2 fasteners. It makes it a lot easier. And once you get the fasteners loose and the brake line, you should be able to just grab the caliper, and if you're standing like I am, you can pull it towards you or just push it towards the front of the car and wiggle it and it will come off. Now, whenever you get the caliper off, you want to set it somewhere where it won't fall and possibly damage the brake line. Now, the next thing I'm going to take off is going to be the rotor, because it's going to have to come off to begin with. So before I take the axle nut off, I'm going to remove these 2 screws and take the rotor off. Now, this is the tool I'm going to be using to remove the rotor. It is an impact driver. So what it does is you put it in there inside the screw and you hit it from the back and it impacts it off there. Now I did have trouble with this bottom screw here. The rotor kept wanting to turn, so what I did was I went and got a pry bar and put in between the studs and held the hub assembly. I held it in place so it wouldn't turn. And now that both screws are removed, I can take the rotor off and continue. And what I did here was I just tapped around the outside of the rotor with a hammer, because sometimes rust can hold it on there. Next thing to be removed is going to be the axle nut, since it's a lot easier to remove whenever everything is still tightened on the suspension than whenever everything is dangled. Now, I'm also going to remove this nut that holds the tie rod end on. You got to remove the cotter key before you do that, though. Now that the tie rod end nut is removed, you can go ahead and take it out, but you're gonna want to put the nut back on just a little bit to protect the threads whenever you hammer it. You can use like a ball joint separator tool if you have that. I usually just hit it though, because they're not really that hard to get out. So what you want to do is just hit right there on the knuckle and keep hitting until it pops out, just like that. And now that the tie rod end is removed, it'll be much easier to remove the axle, so I'm going to go ahead and take that nut off. So I'm using an impact to remove the nut, but you can do it by hand. I've done it by hand multiple times. And I believe that nut is a 36 millimeter nut. Now, I can't stress how important this next part is. You have to remove this wheel speed sensor. You can either unplug it from the car and bring it with the knuckle, or you unbolt it from there and pull it out. Now, somewhat often, it can be very difficult to remove this wheel speed sensor, so that may be what is your case. Now, I was able to just use some pliers and you can see it move free. Sometimes this thing is so rusted in there, it doesn't want to move at all. So this video here is me pulling out the wheel speed sensor, and it was so rusted in there, you can see I actually sprayed PB Blaster around it just to hope to get some lubrication in between the knuckle and the sensor. So, I mean, it was a slow process, but I just grabbed it and kept slowly working it out of there, and it eventually came out of there. So that's something you may have to do. Again, if it doesn't want to come out, you may have to actually take the knuckle to the press or whatever you're using to get the bearing out. Now, we have the axle loose, we have the tie rod end loose. The next thing we need to do to remove the knuckle is we need to remove the ball joints. Now, to fully remove the axle from the hub, you need to remove the lower ball joint and pull it away so this axle has enough room to exit the knuckle. Now, both of these nuts are 17 millimeter, but you'll have to remove that cotter pin before you're able to take the nuts off. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm putting the tie rod end back into the knuckle so it'll hold the knuckle in place and keep it from turning while I try to break these nuts loose. So as you can see, that one broke loose pretty easily. The lower one is sometimes a bit tighter, so there, the lower one broke loose fairly easy too. Now I'm just breaking the ball joint loose out of the knuckle right there, hitting that, and now it's loose. Then I go to the lower, but the lower is pretty tight, so sometimes it can break loose whenever you just hit it. but a lot of times it won't. So they have separators for that, but what I used here was just a pry bar used for CV axles, and I shoved in there. It's kind of like a wedge. I shoved it under the knuckle and above the control arm and hammered it, and it split the two just like that. Now, what I did here was I kept the upper ball joint nut on there and removed the lower, so I was able to push up and push the knuckle out of the lower control arm, and the axle pretty much just falls out at that point. And then you remove the upper ball joint nut and you're good. Alright, now as you can see I have the knuckle and I've brought it over here to the press, and I have a socket pressing right down on the hub, the actual part that has the lug studs on it. Now you want one that fits just that, not pressing directly on the inner race, because if you press on the inner race it can like cause a bearing explosion. So don't do that. And now that you have that hub off, you can see the snap ring on the inside of the bearing. So you want to get snap ring pliers to take that out. If you don't remove that snap ring, the outside race will be pressing down on it and something's going to break. Now, you also want to remove this little metal dust cover here. It's pretty easy. Now, what I did to get this out was I took a flathead and I went on the outside of it, hammered it underneath the edge, and then just kind of hammered it around the outside of it, as like I was trying to scoop it out. Now, for the to get the whole bearing assembly out, mainly you want to have something big enough that you're able to press on that outer race, and you want to have as much contact with the outer race as much as possible, so that it'll be press out much easier and get the full force of the press. Now this is important to know when putting the wheel bearing in on an ABS car. One side is a black ring and the other one is a brown ring. The brown ring is magnetic and that's what the wheel speed sensor picks up, so that needs to be on the inside of the hub, meaning it faces down. Now what I do when putting a new bearing is I use the old bearing. Since it's the exact same size, you can make the outer race have the exact pressure you want on the outer race of the new bearing, pressing it in. So I have that, you can see me pressing it in. One thing to remember is you want to keep everything square. You want to have the knuckle level so you don't have it going in sideways and it'll put it in a bit of a bind. So you want to make sure everything's level and press it in there, and you'll start to see the pressure go up, or you'll feel resistance too whenever it's fully seated inside the hub. And once it is seated, you just want to stop because there's no reason to press it any further. Now you can see that there's more than enough room for the snap ring to go in, which is what you want to see. Now you want to put that metal dust cover back on because that protects the magnetic ring from getting any debris on it that may disrupt signal to the wheel speed sensor. Now you notice a space in that ring, and that is for the wheel speed sensor to come through, so you want to line that back up. Now here I'm going to be putting the snap ring back on. This wheel bearing came with a new one, but I don't see anything wrong with reusing the old one. But the important thing is just that you put the snap ring back in there. Now, this is the old hub. As you can see, the inner race is still pressed on there. If you're going to reuse your old hub, what you want to do is cut a diagonal slit in it using a cutoff wheel. Use a chisel and hammer it in the middle of the slit, and it'll split the race and you can take it off. Sometimes people use heat. I've never had to. Luckily, I'm using a new hub, so I won't have to do that. But if you're reusing your old hub, that's how you're able to reuse it. You just have to take that race off. Now, right now, I am pressing in the new hub, or maybe in your case, it would be the old hub. But one important part you want to remember when pressing the hub in is that you want to have something supporting the inner race on the back side of the bearing, so that the new hub going in isn't just pressing it out, and then you go to put it on, and you have to use the axle to hope it presses it together, pulls it back together how it should be, or something of that nature. But you just want to make sure you have that supported, the inner race. Now, whenever you get this together, you want to look and make sure that the hub isn't contacting the knuckle. If it is, you may have done something wrong, but it shouldn't do that. So just make sure it isn't. So pretty much all that's left is just putting the knuckle back where it should be within the control arms and having the tie rod attached and axle in there. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and if this helped you replace your wheel bearing, go ahead and leave a like. That'd be awesome. And if you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe. If you have any questions, of course, comment. I try to reply to anyone who has questions about my videos. I like to help out. Just let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.